Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Sharon Florentine. Welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, SecDevOps versus DevSecOps, which is the right approach. We have an awesome webinar for you as always, but before we get started, I need to go through some housekeeping items with you. First of all, please remember that this is being recorded, so if you missed any or all of it, you'll be able to go back and watch it again. We will be sending an email with instructions for how to access the webinar on demand, or you can always visit us at devops.com/webinars. It will be there for you as well. We are taking your questions throughout the presentation, so you can use the Q&A tab on your console there to submit your questions at any time. We'll try to get to as many as possible at the end of the presentation. We also have some polling questions for you today. So when you see those pop up on your screen, we'd really appreciate you taking a couple seconds to submit your responses. And finally, stick around till the end where we will do a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So stick around and see if you are a winner. All right, with that, I am pleased to introduce to you today Jeff Keyes, the VP of Product from Plutora, and Marc Hornbeek, CEO and Principal Consultant at Engineering DevOps. Marc is also the author of the book, Engineering DevOps, and we've arranged to have a free download of the book available for you, so you can access that also. With that, I will stop talking, turn my camera off, put myself on mute, and Marc and Jeff let you get right into it.
Sweet. Thank you for the great introduction. And a little bit more, there should be a little pop-up for a book. And, I'll just say, hey, so Marc, you and I have done a number of webinars, but, I heard you wrote a book.
Oh, yeah. You know about that. I mean, you guys, frankly, sponsored it, as you know, but I really appreciate that. And I appreciate being able to communicate my thoughts about SecDevOps and DevSecOps today. There is a chapter in the book on continuous security, which certainly relates to the topic today. And
so if you haven't downloaded it yet, do it now. Get it. It's a great book. It's got a lot of great blueprints and just common sense practices about moving forward on the world of DevOps. So with that in mind, we got a lot to go through today. Give me why don't you give us a high level of some of the topics we're going to hit today?
Sure. I mean, it's obviously the topic is primarily centered around security and DevOps, and in particular, why should security be a key focus when you're talking about DevOps? And we'll talk a little bit about how we got to where we are with security and some of the things that can be done. So understanding how DevOps and security can work together. There are different approaches and thoughts about that have developed over the years. DevSecOps, SecDevOps are two different terms. We'll hear about whether or not those are just different ways of saying the same thing or something actually different. And also continuous security. We'll tie it in with value stream management and show how value stream management really can help with an overarching capability for tying security into DevOps end to end for the total value stream, and how that can be critical all the way out to operations. And finally, how to implement a value stream management, implementation to support continuous security.
Sweet. Well, why don't we just jump right in? I think we have a poll to get started, just to kind of get people thinking about this topic and kind of understand some of the reasons you're here.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Haha. The usual. Yeah, folks, so you should see that poll popping up on your screen there in front of you. We would like to find out where you are in your security journey. If you wouldn't mind taking a second or two and letting us know if you are just getting started, if you have your pipeline set up but have not yet integrated security tools, if you have security in CI but not in deployment, or if you have security in the delivery stage of your pipeline.
Fantastic.
Wow.
We'll kind of let that go, and people continue to add a couple of responses. But you know what? So Marc, this is a hot topic. I always talk about security as It's like bacon, goes good with everything. What kind of trends are you seeing in the market right now around security?
Well, the little diagram on the right-hand side of this chart sort of says it all. I mean, what everybody's trying to figure out how to stay ahead of the bad actors, and while you're running to stay away from they're running faster to catch up with you. So there's a race going on. That's certainly pretty evident with a lot of news articles and that you see about security problems. So the race to defend against attackers. So the race to defend against attackers has to accelerate. That's where DevOps gets really interesting, to try to be nimble, be able to do things quickly and hopefully faster than the bad guys. This acceleration is occurring both from the product point of view and the sophistication of the attackers. So if you look at what's happening with products over as a trend, things are getting more sophisticated. You've got more distributed applications, more distributed infrastructures that they're being deployed over. And that's requiring more pipelines to support the changes and management of changes. And the supply chains are getting bigger and broader and deeper. So all of those things are adding attack surfaces. So the number of vulnerabilities is going up exponentially. So the number of things to secure basically is accelerating. Meanwhile, the attackers are getting smarter. There are more of them. They're grouping together. They're gaining experience. They're getting more mature. They're sharing ideas and it's becoming more like enterprise level capability.
Yep.
A lot of collaboration, and there's lots of success stories amongst attackers that you read about in the news. So fundamentally, those are the trends from almost a layman's point of view, but they're certainly really disturbing.
Very much so, and I find it also interesting that some of the impact of some of the attack, threat surfaces now are, software companies, where let me get into the supply chain and increase my impact. So what kinds of impacts are you seeing from these breaches?
Again, if you watch the news, I'm sure most people in this call have probably noticed some of the major news items there's an acceleration going on. The impacts of security breaches are basically going up. The big one that was announced in December, SolarWinds, like you said, is part of the supply chain, where essentially a tools company for a tool that's embedded in many corporations and enterprise and institutions networks became a source of attacks by itself and has affected tens of thousands, potentially, companies and organizations around the world. That was followed up with a big, announcement. The Microsoft had a zero-day vulnerability in Exchange, and that's affected many organizations as well. You take back in March, even an individual company, Acer, was threatened with a $50 million demand for a ransomware attack. April comes along and you see another tool, Pulse Secure, introducing vulnerabilities again, affecting many companies and organizations. And, that goes on. In May, you've got the whole, gas pipeline structure of the United States being shut down because of ransomware attacks. And it continues, right? I mean, there's a new ransomware attacks. Excuse me.
Yep.
Only in the last month. So the impacts are just going up as the number of attack surfaces and the sophisticated of the attackers gets better. So we definitely need a solution to this problem. It's a software security problem, and this is why we're having this webinar, to hopefully give some ideas on how to help.
Absolutely. And even at a company that I used to work at previously at Kaseya, another supply chain problem, and the impact of the number of companies it shut down, big and small, everyone's a threat now. It doesn't matter. So talking about why it's important, I love the title of this. Can you talk about a bit of the blast radius of the types of failures and where they go?
Yeah, this slide is basically leading to the point that you really do need to pay attention to security. A lot of folks, when they put together their DevOps pipelines and value streams and all that, they're thinking more about features and accelerating time to market for innovations and all of those good things, which is certainly the main point of DevOps. But as the security is unfortunately often left behind because the developers are thinking about developing their features and not so much about security. And but if you think about the impacts of a security problem versus a feature failure, Usually the security problems are going to have a much bigger impact. In other words, the blast radius will be felt across the entire enterprise. When you're in the news because your client's private data is being shared around the world, or your networks are being taken down, and your services going out because of security issues, you have to take the pipeline down for the whole United States. This is a much bigger concern than individual features. Not to say you should stop developing features, of course, but certainly security needs to get at least equal attention in many DevOps pipelines and development organizations. Otherwise,
Absolutely,
we're going to have this big blast radius problem. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So the poll is now closed. Let me tell you what the results are. A third of you said you're just getting started. Great place to be as you're starting to think about this. Lots of opportunities, and I promise you a long and a fun journey that will never end on this topic. Another third have pipeline set up from their deployment and delivery pipeline set up, but really haven't integrated security tools yet. And the remaining folks, about 20% or 18%, have security and CI, but not deployment, and 13% have security at the delivery stage of our pipeline. And I'm assuming some of those too are, have hey, we've got a security hardening phase as part of our delivery. Great. Those are great results that, are somewhat what, as a vendor, that's some of the things that I see in the industry as well. People are still trying to figure this out, and it's not a surprise. Security, I don't want to say it wasn't thought about at the beginning of DevOps, but Marc, like the history of security in DevOps?
Yeah, so what I would certainly agree with you, by the way. In my own consulting work, I work with a lot of different organizations, and quite often at the beginning of their DevOps journey, they're just worried about getting out of development chaos and then getting some form of CI integration, automation going, and they're not really thinking much about security. And usually the next step is to put kind of the back end in place so they get continuous flow out to delivery. And finally, they start thinking about security. So that's a path I see actually happening.
Sure.
I'm not saying that's the recommended path, because there are ways you could think about security from the beginning. Doesn't mean you have to do everything at once. It's pretty much impossible to do everything at once. But I think it's a miss for many organizations to not think about security up front when you're on your journey. And this chart is essentially it's kind of the same point, but from an industry point of view. Many of the concepts of DevOps preceded the so-called DevOps movement that was essentially credited with being announced in 2009. If you look at the things that were being talked at that point, there was very minimal discussion of security, more discussion about lead times and release frequencies and things like that for innovative software features. It was, and then 2011, one of the key books, the Continuous Delivery, Jez Humble's book, again mentioned security, but very little actually, and that's more focused mostly at the CI end, but also some of the CD concepts too. The Phoenix Project itself, which everybody refers to as a key, book about DevOps, really doesn't mention security, and I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying that from a point of view of, how much of mind security has been in the history of DevOps, public version of DevOps. There wasn't a whole lot said about security in the so-called early days.
Right.
2016, the DevOps Handbook had a chapter, part of a chapter had some mentions of security. The DevOps Adoption Handbook, again, some paragraphs. It wasn't until 2019 at an RSA conference, as well as my own book got published on continuous security and talked about DevSecOps practices. The Department of Defense issued a enterprise DevOps reference design, which is a really cool document. And, it really started to get attention in 2019. And now, recently, the Department of Homeland Security is working on a guideline. It's not really finished. It's a work in progress, but it talks about SecDevOps, giving security higher priority. Just recently, the Biden administration has encouraged, and NIST has responded with a security framework that prioritizes security. So, you can see that it's not just individual companies or organizations that kind of have given security an afterthought, but the whole industry has. So it's just catch up, partly because I think those attack surfaces have become, more prevalent, and the actors have become more sophisticated. So if there was ever a time to give security, high priority, the time has come.
Yep. The world has changed. This is the new terrorism now, is state sponsored, all sorts of stuff, and it's coming our way. Let's dive in. That's an interesting background, but let's get to the meat of this thing. When you're thinking about value streams and the various sections of software delivery that you're working on, let's talk about scoping this problem. When I think about security, where?
Right. So everywhere. That's one of the challenges with security. I mean, there's no such thing as 100% security. So the first question you would ask is, what is, sufficient security? What do you need to secure? Maybe the first question to ask.
Right.
And, I think the security experts would tell you, well, what you want to know is what is your family jewels, the crown jewels of the company. What is it that you're trying to secure, and understand that. But from the point of view of value streams, there are several vectors of things that need to be considered with, right? The value stream of the applications that are being developed. So there's planning, design, integration, pre-production, production aspects of applications, but there's also the same thing for the infrastructure upon which they run. That has its own value stream, especially with software-defined networks and all of that. But even any kind of infrastructure as code, those same things apply. And the pipelines themselves have a value stream. They have planning, design, integration, pre-prod, and production aspects. So there's at least those three dimensions, and they all have security possible vulnerabilities where things can creep in through the supply chains or code that you're developing yourself or the way you're operating. They're mostly, there's a lot of similarities, but the emphasis on applications tends to be more about architectural components and features. For infrastructure, it's more about the deployment environments and the automation of that. In pipelines, it's more about the tools and the tool chains and the automation. But fundamentally, all that stuff potentially needs to be secured, and that's the question, right? To what extent do you secure what? Nobody can afford to put in, the best tools everywhere and all these pipelines all at once. It's it would be daunting, but you do need to really think about your situation. Where are the highest risks?
Yeah, one of the biggest impacted, one of the biggest infrastructure attacks of recently is the WannaCry virus, a worm actually, and its primary attack surface, frankly, in the enterprise, wasn't the desktop compute. It was the test environments. All these test environments that were just sitting out there being stale, unpatched, turned out to be a petri dish for that worm that just worked its way through the environment, and just bad. So as we think about the mindset, and we think about security in the context of software delivery, who and where? Give us some ways of thinking about this.
Yeah, so here's where I think it's important for developers in particular to understand, because the typical developer is thinking about designing a new feature or product to make to satisfy a customer according to what they understand the customer wants, and to get feedback quickly, and that's really addressed by the Agile framework. But in reality, there's a bigger picture here, right? I mean, quality assurance folks tend to have a broader, if you like, not necessarily as deep, but broader responsibility to think about how to verify a product or service all the way out to, up until reach for all the different configurations available for the release. So it's a little bit broader. This is addressed by DevOps and continuous testing frameworks mostly. Operations has an even broader concern to ensure that the product or service continues to work for all the different production configurations, not just at the time of release, but even for the life of the product or service, which may be quite different over time. Sure. These things tend to be addressed by the site reliability engineering framework to some extent. There's no unified framework that takes all of that into account. And finally, if you think about the security mindset, there are another couple of dimensions to be concerned about. You're not only trying to defend, you're trying to defend whatever is valuable for an entire organization, the organization that created the product, but also all the organizations that use the product or service, against both, intended as well as unintended and malicious actions by people and entities that are both inside and outside their organization. So you can see there's several more dimensions to think about. And this is where SecDevOps, DevSecOps, what I call continuous security, becomes important, to really think about that from the get-go.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into that. Point of the webinar. What's DevSecOps? And let's compete these two.
Yeah. So in my consulting practice, there's a lot of different, practices associated with DevSecOps. This is kind of the summary version for a webinar, but it's basically all about integrating security practices with DevOps. Really thinking about how you can adjust your culture to consider security as code and to make that a priority, of at least as much a priority as the code and the applications. You want to engineer all the security controls into the processes, and not only the development, but also the deployment processes. You want to remove security as a bottleneck, which is one of the key ideas of DevOps, to make it lean and fast. Bridge the gaps with the security team's practices, but at the same time, don't slow down the pipeline by automating things and making those controls quick and efficient, and generally replace siloed team practices with better communication, especially communication between developers and the security teams, and share responsibility and execution and knowledge. So that's kind of the very high level view of DevSecOps practices as is typically discussed. There's no standard, but that's what I see as typically being discussed as the practices for DevSecOps.
Yeah, I also heard this is described as, instead of having a hardening phase in your pipeline, just shift that into the pipeline as part of the automation that you're doing. Well, there's a new phrase, a new kid in town, SecDevOps. What's this about?
Yeah, so SecDevOps has been debated as a terminology. There were various terminologies being used, and some people argue, like I think you can see the article at the bottom of the chart here, SecDevOps versus DevSecOps versus SecDevOps arose by any other name. Is it just a different name? Not really. I mean, I was thinking that myself, actually, until I started thinking about it a little deeper. There's this idea that Mark Twain long ago, his famous recording says, to change your life, you need to change your priorities. What I see again and again and again, just as you mentioned, Jeff, that if you don't give security a priority, it generally gets pushed to the back end of the project, and then you have potentially a lot of vulnerabilities and problems that are hard to catch up with later. So putting security up front, it doesn't mean that's the only thing you do, of course, but SecDevOps really, is the idea of put security first in terms of your mindset and then what you're doing while you're implementing DevOps. So all the team members share a responsibility for security from the get-go, not something that you think about in phase 2 or 3. The policies are designed in from the start. It doesn't mean you implement all the controls in an automated fashion from the start, but you'd start designing them in from the beginning of your transformation, not later on. Security considerations are given high weight at each stage, in the pipeline when you're doing gate decisions to promote software through the pipeline. Security issues that come up are given very high weight with SecDevOps. So there is a real difference. I'm convinced there's a real difference. Again, there's no such thing as a standard, but in my mind, SecDevOps is a stronger concept than DevSecOps, and therefore I believe it is actually, materially different.
Love it. And, as this fits into the overall, what do we start to think about then, and how does one win out over the other, and how do we think about it overall as we're engineering our DevOps pipeline and how we deliver software?
Yeah, so learning something about security and software is something that I encourage every developer to give time for, and every leader to to promote in their organization. So this is a big picture of what there is to secure. Essentially, at the center, you've got your CI/CD pipeline, bracketed by planning and operations, which is the whole value stream. All of that needs to be secured. Everything that it needs to run, all the elastic infrastructure as code, as a service underneath it, cloud and data centers have to be secured. and even the processes for managing releases need to be secure. So at the top of the food chain, you've got value stream management. Value stream management has an opportunity, therefore, to really play a strong role in orchestrating and providing analysis and visibility of all the security concerns of the whole shooting match, if you like, underneath.
Yeah, and it I think the point here is to get out of doing everything all at the end. Continuous security being a let's look at this in the front. How many times have I've been involved in a product release or an iteration, we hit a hardening phase, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute, to fix this security threat, it's going to require re-architecture. It's going to require introducing a whole bunch of stuff that adds massive risk and destabilization of the product because we didn't think about it first. Big problem. And so I like how you've laid this out of thinking about the pipeline, the infrastructure, and the application, thinking about it across the entirety of the pipeline itself. So with that, I think we have another poll.
We do. Sorry, it's given me an issue here. Let me get to it. Okay, there we go. My apologies, folks. Good old technology does it again. Here we go. All right. That should be coming up on your screen right about now. What kind of security practices do you follow? And this poll allows you to select multiple responses. So go ahead and choose any or all of them that are applicable to you. We do threat modeling in the planning stage. From our development teams, we have security represented in our development teams. Our developers are trained on secure development practices. Our security controls are automated and integrated with our value streams.
Well, we'll let folks do that, finish that poll for just another minute. So, Marc, let's dive in now. Security, value streams, how do they fit together?
Yeah, so this is, in my opinion, value stream management has a particularly, key role in security, and because of its position in the overall blueprint that we just talked about. You have visibility over not only the CI/CD pipeline, but everything from planning through to production. So you can provide from that level security governance, dashboards, analytics, having gate policies as code for all the different pipelines, for a whole federated set of pipelines as well, not just for any individual one. And you have the ability to orchestrate and make visible what I call the three dimensions of DevOps, which are the people, processes, and tech in that order, right, of importance. It's often security issues are derived from people issues, sharing or not doing the right things. That's true for leadership, the way you address, way you set up culture, the way you train people on how to understand security and how to do things like secure coding practices and stuff like that. So value stream management has a role to play in education as well as codifying operations of people. And then, of course, the processes associated with the whole value stream. So the policies as code that are enforcing good security policies and different practices. And finally, all the different technologies, because the value stream management can ingest, interfaces with different tools and tool chains across different pipelines, orchestrate those, automate, processes that may be difficult to automate without it, and provide monitoring analysis. So to me, value stream management really has a key role to play in this game of security, and I think it's underutilized so far. I think we're going to see a growth in the application of value stream management and security.
I agree. I think that's why we're doing this. No. So I think the poll, we're going to close it now. So looks like from a results point of view, about a fifth, 20% are doing threat modeling in the planning stage. That's a lot higher than I expected. Dev teams are implementing some level of security. Security represented in development teams as security representatives. Looks like there's another fifth of folks that are doing that. The highest number is that we have developers trained on secure development practices, and almost a third responded with that. The lowest area of responses that our security controls are automated and integrated with our value streams. Marc, 14% said that they had that integrated and connected. Does that surprise you?
No, I'd like to see it higher, but I think, this is again where I think that it's not easy. I think value stream management tooling can help with that. But yeah,
sure.
It's again an indication of priority as well as the difficulty in having a tool capable of doing it.
You bet. Well, let's dive in. People, process, tech, right? This is the people side. So what is the people side, and what are the expectations around security as we integrate SecDevOps and continuous security with value stream management? Yeah,
so when I think about continuous security, it even goes beyond, if you like, SecDevOps. It's thinking about not only, if you think about DevOps, it's accelerating continuous delivery. In other words, getting things to production. But continuous security really needs to extend even out to production. So if you look at the people involved that need to be thinking about security, clearly the leaders, they tend to focus mostly at the planning end and then the delivery end, and they worry about what's going on in production. Developers tend to focus all the way through until delivery, and then they don't think that much about production. QA, kind of similar. Infrastructure and ops are mostly concerned about production and delivery, although with SRE coming along, and they also get involved to some extent early on, maybe in planning mostly. Security team needs to be along all the way into production, and product management tends to be like the leadership. But fundamentally, people have different perspectives on security and different roles to play. Fundamentally, they need to collaborate, and there needs to be a lot of open communication for this all to work well, to be able to run ahead of the bad actors. Like if you think back to that, that funny diagram. We need a team just as capable as the teams of bad actors, and this is the team that's going to do it.
Yeah. So, well, and taking the next step of, what kind of processes are we talking about then in each of the phases?
Well, there you go. This is a kind of an eye chart, and I hesitate to say it's a simplification of reality. There are a lot of processes potentially that you can use to secure your value streams. This is why you need a comprehensive capability like a value stream management capability to do all of this, right? And you can't do it all at once. So it's a good thing people are doing threat modeling and understanding where their priorities are. But every stage in the value stream, there are processes that need to be implemented, automated as much as possible to consider security. So at the beginning, planning, you've got gap analysis, even value stream mapping to figure out where your bottlenecks are, so you can introduce security controls and automate those without slowing things down. Generally think carefully about all your requirements for security. Look at user stories, and actually build out plans that you put in your backlog. I'm not going to go through all of these lists, but design and coding, threat modeling, security frameworks need to be considered. All the open source scanning, making sure that people understand coding standards for security. Again, I'm not going to go through the list. I mean, one of the biggest bottlenecks actually is test environment.
Yeah,
that's a good one to really focus in on. Similarly, at continuous integration, you see, test environment again. In fact, test environment occurs right across a lot of this. So that's an area where you can really typically save a lot of time in there. If you focus on that, you can afford some time to build in more security controls without slowing down the pipeline. That's typically a good tactic. All the different scanning tools, can apply from continuous integration all the way through to production, especially static and dynamic scanning, and before production release, and then afterwards you can use interface scanning and remote scanning technologies, all the way to production, which typically is considered beyond the scope of DevOps or DevSecOps or even SecDevOps, but chaos engineering, social engineering, fire drills, something called purple teams, which isn't on the list here. External attack surface management is a new terminology. I've just recently become familiar with it. It's very relevant for production as well. So fundamentally, all of those things can potentially be automated and tied in through the value stream management systems.
And so, Marc, your advice here isn't, do all this at the same time, take a couple of them, start with that. How do you get going here?
You're right. So nobody has budget to do all of this all at once. It's just not technically possible. So it's all about risk analysis, figure out where your biggest risks are, but don't give up. It should be part of the plan from the get-go. It shouldn't be, we're going to think about security in phase 3 of our DevOps implementation. No, start at the beginning, build out your plan, figure out what your risks are, collaborate with the security teams, and start it from the beginning and build it as you go. It's going to take time to build up a complete capability. This is a long list of potential things. Some of them may be more important than others, depending on your particular application and the risk profile of those applications. That's why you need some security experts to work with you together to figure out what those high priority areas are, and and work with your management as well. They need to understand the scope of this and understand where to invest, and to balance the investment of software features with security of those of your enterprise, basically.
Absolutely. Well, then let's dive into some of the tooling and where it fits. What kind of tools? Where do they plug in?
So I probably could have just repeated the last slide almost, but for every item on the last slide, there's tooling. There's software, different tool choices out there, free tools, homegrown tools, commercial enterprise tools. But starting at planning, there's tools to help you with gap assessments. That's actually something that I do and other consultants do, help you understand what are your gaps. Threat modeling tools, planning tools, design, continuous integration. There's a lot of scanning tools. Some of them are open source, like SonarCube, and that can help. But there's a lot of commercial ones as well that have additional value. Tools for unit testing, dynamic testing, functional testing. Again, I emphasize testing because it tends to be the biggest bottleneck from what I've noticed in most value streams, and the biggest component of that bottleneck tends to be setting up and releasing test environments. To me, that's a big one, probably should be bolded. Tools for again, scanning in production, automating pen test results and pen testing, vulnerability testing, all along the way, logging and dashboarding and secrets management type tools. And closer to production is things like chaos monkey tools, fire drills, tools associated with that. Putting a perimeter around just your network appliances, things like that.
The product guy in me would say, gosh, if you're trying to figure out tools and some of the practices, just pick some from each of the phases and start there. If you're not, only 20% of you are doing threat modeling in the planning stage. That is like you can get threat modeling tools for free. It's an exercise. Go through it. It's not that hard. It's pretty much turn everybody into, hackers and go through the process. There's free security tools that you can plug into your CI. Go get them. Just if you haven't implemented any, implement one, because once you implement one, it's a lot easier to implement 5 and off to the races. If you haven't evaluated your test environments and do some modeling there, gosh, get one. You know what I mean? Start looking at how you're managing your secrets. Lots of tools there. They're just, pick a few and take a bite out of the apple each iteration that you do, each cycle, just put some into the cycle and go. It doesn't take a lot to just start building this into your standard practices. So, well, and kind of thinking through that, I mean, really this gets into, the guidance. How do we build out a roadmap to improve security in our pipelines?
Yeah, so again, this is just an example of such a roadmap. This is not any kind of standard and not necessarily even the right roadmap for the listeners, but have a roadmap is the point. Think about it and don't wait till you get a mature DevOps pipeline and then think about security. So from the get-go, as an example, tie in your business goals with security, do those assessments, if you don't have the right expertise in-house, and hire a consultant or whatever you need to do, but get a really good security assessment for your applications. I agree with Jeff. Don't try to boil the ocean and do it for all applications at once. I always recommend start with a small set or even one model application, build out, an example that the rest of the organization can look at, set priorities, and figure out what your controls and metrics are going to be for security in particular. In order to get, something real, then tie it in with continuous integration. So things like scanning tools are often one of the first steps that make sense to do. Make sure the developers have training in secure coding practices, that the tests are built into their CI automation for security, at least some of them. Understanding what you're monitoring, at least for the CI process, is going to be from a security point of view. That if you think the SecDevOps concepts, then make sure that any security failures are highlighted and acted upon with priority. Overall, set governance strategies around that concept where security is given very high priority as part of your governance strategy. Rounding out to continuous delivery, once you have CI set up, then automate security testing within the staging environments and acceptance environments and delivery processes, putting security around your infrastructure as code, and release and deployment gates should have security metrics. In general, having service level objectives for security. So by the time you get there, you've finally got, a continuous flow. The first way of DevOps, but now I'd say SecDevOps, continuous flow, because it includes security. Ultimately, you're trying to enhance the feedback once you have that flow and get into ultimately continuous improvement where you're applying more advanced methods and rounding out all the security controls and automating more and more and getting higher levels of acceleration. Along the way, you may indeed have to balance things like lead time and release frequency with security. If you're really thinking about SecDevOps as a priority and security as a priority, you may indeed have to make some, choices like, okay, maybe we can't go quite as fast as we'd like to because we are going to have to take care of some security concerns. That's a should be a deliberate decision, not just something that is ignored. I guarantee you, the first time you have a major security breach, you're going to wish that you had done
that. Absolutely. So we've talked a bit about value stream management. How does this fit into the value stream management world? What does that even mean?
Yeah, so tools like your product, Patora, are a great example. To tie in all of the tools, to be able to ingest and interface the different types of tools into value stream management, so you can orchestrate the processes automatically as much as possible, or even some of the manual processes with the value stream management tools, and then being able to get visibility through dashboards and capability is the way. Platforms like Patora have a major role to play, in my opinion, and I think a growing role to play because of the fact that it's really not only got visibility end to end, more than just CI/CD tools, but it also can look at the whole federated set of value streams, which is getting more and more important when you look at modern applications and the way they're broken up into microservices or multiple services or database services in parallel with pipelines for the application and things like that.
Is precisely the point. I mean, you can't just look in one spot. You've got to look at the overall. So all right, big picture. Can't get there overnight. We talked about a roadmap. How do you get there?
Yeah, so this really just says, it's an iterative process. Even as you're implementing things, your threat space is going to be evolving. You're going to have those bad actors continue to race after you. And you need to know what you're going to have new vulnerabilities from code that you're either importing or creating. So keeping an eye on the problem space is the first part of the big picture, knowing what your threats and vulnerabilities and risks are, doing things like threat modeling and other planning activities, understand that for not only your systems, subsystems, features, and all the components of those. On the other side, you've got a solution space. So you already have whatever solution you have, and don't just consider the technology of the solution, but the applications, the infrastructure, and the pipelines, and the people, process, and technology aspects of all of those things together. You think about trying to close the gap, if you like, between your ongoing problem space and ongoing solution space requirements. If you've got a good security, good planning process, then again, security is going to be top of mind throughout that. You're going to put security items prioritized in the backlog, managing themes and epics and stories, and then Agile and DevOps can take over and help you deliver those things. And it's an ongoing big picture process. You're not going to get all of it at once, but through constantly, working through this process, you will get a better and better capability that's more and more secure over time and keep ahead of the bad actors.
Now, this is always the point when I would say, whoa, wait a minute, back the train up there, Mark. You just said things like backlog and have user stories around all this stuff. Feels like you're talking about building features that are security related into the pipeline. Sounds like you're talking about adding work that is done that really we would track just like any other work.
That's exactly the point. Yeah, it's not just something that somebody else does. It needs to be part of the daily life. And again, with security SecDevOps concepts, it should be given highest consideration at a daily life. It doesn't mean it's the only thing you do, obviously. That wouldn't make any sense. But it should be given very high consideration.
Gotcha. So I'm going to start doing some planning. So what are some, key planning topics as I think through these things?
So threat modeling, we already mentioned. If you're not doing threat modeling, then, that's probably the first thing to consider, and work with the security teams on choosing a threat modeling tool and working with threat modeling process, and get training going with the developers as well. One approach I use in my consulting work is to do gap analysis to help people understand against, a certain set of characteristics and gap categories. Where are you now? Where do you need to be? And then how do you figure out where to close the gap against different, pillars of DevSecOps or SecDevOps? Value stream management can also be a great way to, figure out what are the impacts of introducing new security controls at any point in the value stream. You're trying to improve the cadence of releases and lead times, but as you're introducing security controls, if you're not really careful and aware of what that's going to do to your value stream, you could actually take a step backwards. And maybe that is okay, and if it's a deliberate decision, but you want to, keep your value stream map clear and updated, and current, and be aware as you introduce changes what the likely effects are going to be.
Yeah, I remember the first time I did a threat model. I did it as a brand new product guy, and working with my team of 3 developers that I had at that point. And I was so excited to we're going to do a threat model because they told us we had to. In the back of my mind, I remember thinking, well, what a waste of time. This is just going to slow us down. We did a threat model. We uncovered some things. We fixed a couple of bugs, and it was like, okay, whatever, check the box. What was fun at the end of the cycle is we did an external pen test. Brought in a group to basically hack our solution. The irony is, one of the threat surfaces that we said, nobody will ever attack that. Oh, not only they found a way to breach it and basically compromise sensitive data. It was fascinating. All of a sudden, it's like, wait a minute. If we had that gotten out there, would have been bad. Would have been a huge breach of trust, if you will, of the company. So ever since then, it was like, wow, we really have to take this to a different level. So,
absolutely.
Well, let's look at the process of modeling the application and how you actually go about this.
Yeah, so this is just something I constantly espouse in all my consulting work, is that don't try to boil the ocean. Figure out what pick at least one application in your organization that you would consider to be a good model. I have some criteria I use to help companies choose what that model should be, but probably not too many models, maybe 1, 2, or 3, but I even say let's pick one and do proof of concept, stand up an MVP, and then implement the first way, second way, and third way of DevOps ultimately. It doesn't mean that the other applications are left behind. The model is a model that everybody can learn from and use, and everybody shares in that information proactively. You can scale what you learn to other applications. Some of the things you learn in the model may apply to some applications, some maybe not, but fundamentally a model is a good way to get that visibility and share information and help learn and experiment and teach. So once you get the first way of SecDevOps, if you like, working in the model, then you can move it on to, you can keep moving it forward to more advanced versions. That way, you limit the blast radius of any problems, if you like, that you might introduce by innovating to just the model. At the same time, you're gaining confidence in the model as you evolve it, and you know in a more sophisticated way what needs to be improved and what the impacts are going to be.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That really takes us to having a platform that you can kind of bring this all together. I know we've been hinting at that, but in essence, that's the story here. There's a question on the Q&A side, which is, what's the difference between automation and orchestration? And I think the best way, in order to tell part of this story, I need to answer that question here and now. Automation is a tool that runs and does a bunch of stuff. Orchestration basically says, hey, there's some activities that have to get done. Some may be automated, some may be manual. We really don't care which, but they got to get done. And orchestration will, in essence, puppeteer a bunch of disparate tools in a way that combining them together and combine the manual interaction. One of the cool parts about the Platora platform is the release orchestration, basically the pipeline orchestration as it sits over the top of the CI and continuous delivery side to bring things together. So the value of the purpose of bringing value stream management as it relates to security is to, as you said, Marc, bring in all this data into a single place, orchestrate across the various activities that need to happen from planning all the way to delivery, and then give you analytics and reporting to see how you're doing. One of the most fundamental questions that everybody will have to answer is, are we doing better? What a tragedy to go to management and say, we want to invest time and money into tool or process XYZ without any ability to produce results of, was it more efficient? Was it better? Was it stronger? The better, faster, stronger, and ultimately cheaper. Those are important questions to have. The Platora platform ingests tools from all aspects of the pipeline, from planning, test, all the way through. A lot of the metrics that are created actually come from the testing side, and those results get brought in, and you can correlate them. What is interesting then is you can then see how that relates to incidences, outages on the service management side. So where this fits, for example, and where it gets really interesting is as you start to look at a completely manual process, if you are just getting started on security, as a number of folks on the call are, you can do something that a lot of our enterprise customers started with, which is a release governance report. Hey, there's a big, massive checklist of crap that we're supposed to get done related to security. Yes, I know it's not shifted left. Yes, I can see that it's not all automated, but let me make sure this stuff gets done. You implement that. And as you're going through it, you decide, well, wait a minute. Why am I spending time doing this manually or asking people if it got done? Why don't I build it into the pipeline and get the feedback automatically? Great. That's part of what happens. And then you can still produce the same report, but with less effort and time because stuff's just happening automatically. You can look at the phases of delivery as part of the release schedule and see when things are coming out and how they relate to the various activities. You can have an idea of the environments that are going to be needed. You can have an idea of the deployments and the kinds of tests you want to run at each phase. You want to run a pen test. You want to make sure you've done your threat model. You can do all of that at that point in time. Another really key aspect of this story is, frankly, the ability to balance the work distribution between functional and non-functional items, specifically in this case, security items. So all the way back up in the planning stage, let's start to think about the work items that we want to introduce. In so many pipelines, the same individuals that are doing the work of creating features are also writing unit tests. And not just unit tests, but are the ones, frankly, that have to be involved in doing things like threat modeling and doing things like the threat surface, the implementation of the tools and analyzing the results and building out the infrastructure automation. why not track all of these items way up front so we can start to decide, how are we doing? How long is it taking? Are we making the right investments? If we see that a particular application is more vulnerable than another, let's invest more into that, and let's track the work so we can see how we're doing. Excuse me. So the point of this is these are a sample of some of the features you get with a value stream management platform. The ability to orchestrate, to have visibility, what's coming and when, and to balance the work and see how well you're doing, and then produce results automatically without having to dig at it and so forth. With that, I think we have time for just a few questions. Let's see. Marc, there's a question for you. It occurred to me, are there any known incidences of malicious code, like a Trojan horse, inserts into open source and free scanning tools?
Yep, is the short answer. Yeah, there's actually quite a few such incidents. I mean, this is the benefit as well. The pros and cons of open source. There's a lot of people that are involved, and they can accidentally make changes. And if you don't have enough governance, which open source often doesn't have quite enough governance, then yeah, you can have problems creeping in. There was an article even last week about a university that put in some experimental code that opened up a whole lot of new vulnerabilities almost deliberately as an experiment, and it hit the news. That wasn't a good idea. It was part of Linux distribution. Yeah.
There's a question here. Are you able to have reports that map to industry standards like NIST, PCI, HIPAA, GDPR? I'm assuming that's for Platora. Yes, that we do that every day. One of the points of using the platform is that it just gets out of the box done. If you want to stop producing the reports and making sure people are getting that done, in essence, you templatize the release process. And the simplest and lowest investment in terms of the dev team path is to implement a template that has a checklist at the end saying, did you do the following? The better approach is to mature that template and include more of that in the pipeline like we were talking about. But the same report you can produce for anyone from an audit point of view and simplify the world of audit. Stop spending time on working for reporting for audit. Spend time doing stuff that matters of improving the pipeline. Automate as much as you can, shift left, and so forth. Hang on, I'm going through the questions.
Probably have time for maybe one more before I need to do my quick wrap up. Sorry.
You got it. Are SecDevOps and DevSecOps and continuous testing really the same thing, or are they different frameworks?
Yeah, so I think this presentation mostly addressed that, but fundamentally, SecDevOps, in my mind, is materially different than DevSecOps because it really, materially emphasizes security first at every point in the planning and validation phases throughout the value stream. Whereas continuous security, in my mind, the way I described in my book anyway, is it goes even beyond that. It takes the concepts of SecDevOps into production as well, whereas DevOps is mostly about getting to production. Continuous security does that, but it also includes what's going on in production as well.
Fantastic. Well, and like I said, if you have any needs of a platform to combine all this together and produce the reporting and help manage the journey, give us a call. If you need consulting, Marc is available, and lots of folks out there. But great, we'll turn it over to you, Sharon.
Thanks, guys. And thanks, folks. If you submitted a question and we didn't get to it, rest assured we're going to gather all those up and send them over to Jeff and Marc, and they'll be able to follow up with you afterwards. So certainly appreciate all the great engagement and questions that came in. Just as a reminder, the session has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of it, you'll be able to watch it again. We will send an email with instructions for how to do that, or you can always visit us at devops.com/webinars. It will be there for you as well. I went ahead and drew our Amazon winners for today, so I'm just going to run through those real quick. Our winners today are Sasha S., Patrick R., Michael O, and Melissa H. Congratulations to all our Amazon winners. We will send you an email with instructions for claiming your gift card, so keep an eye on your inbox. And if you don't see it there, make sure and check your spam folders. And also, audience folks, make sure you get your complimentary copy of Marc's book, Engineering DevOps. We've got the sticky note there for you to go ahead and download that. It is a fantastic book, and I know you will get a lot out of it. Thank you all again so much for joining us today. We hope to see you again soon at another DevOps.com webinar. I am Sharon Florentine, signing off.